Imagine navigating the roofing industry during one of the toughest marketing years ever, adapting to shifting regulations and managing a team through a series of high-stakes acquisitions, all while embracing a servant leadership philosophy. Today's guest, Jon Broce, has not only done that, but has thrived by finding the balance between grit and growth. In this episode, we dive into how Jon transitioned from an owner-operator mindset to his current role as COO of Vertex's Florida region, leading one of the most innovative teams in the roofing industry. We'll unpack his journey of consolidating top-tier roofing brands, building an all-star team, and redefining leadership in a constantly evolving market. Jon isn't about building businesses, he's also about building people. Whether it's coaching teams to lead effectively or crafting processes that elevate operations, his passion for sustainable growth and servant leadership is inspiring. Get ready to learn how to lead with impact, create scalable systems, and prepare for the future of roofing. This is a masterclass in balancing strategy with empathy. Let's dive in with Jon Broce on the Roofing Success Podcast. Welcome to the Roofing Success Podcast. I'm Jim Aline, and I'm here to bring you insights from top leaders in the roofing industry to help you grow and scale your roofing business. The nicest guy in roofing, Jon Broce.
Yep. The nicest guy that used to be in roofing, right?
That's right. And one of the smartest guys in roofing. So if anyone doesn't know Jon, my goodness, get to know him because you need to. You need to. How's it going with MHI Roofing?
Man, it's good. Been through a lot of fun changes.
That's right.
Yeah, growth, and we're in the middle of the grind to growth mentality, right? So that's the best way to describe it. You used to grind, and now we're just learning how to grow.
When does the grind stop?
So I don't think it ever stops. I think it's a mentality. Like you just grind it a different way and you call it growth. But yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, you guys have had an exceptional run, over the years, building into multiple locations and then being acquired by Vertex and then let's describe what you do now on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so my role is COO of the Florida region. So operationally, I'm more of a linebacker right now, right? So it's like I get to go into the operations, help find inefficiencies, try to figure out a way to help them, iron those out as fast as possible. Getting the teams ready for Service Titan integrations, trying to get job duties and things to line up with what's coming, just little things. And then, really trying, to live out the servant leadership role, right? So just being there to be helpful. A lot of transition stuff that, that you don't expect that, I've been through now that I can help coach through and talk through and, little things, whether it's the guys that's out there in the field that don't understand, what's the next steps to the owners, that just sold their company. So I get to really, I get to help and try to enrich their lives now. So it's fun, it's a good time.
And it's a whole, you guys are, I don't know the way to put it, but Vertex is playing in a whole different, playing a different game. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but with the acquisitions or mergers that have happened, what are some of the notable mergers that have gone into Vertex now? So
as far as acquisitions, you got Monarch Roofing, you got Eustace Roofing, you got Victor's, King Quality. We got a lot of high-end guys that are just, that were already up here with ethics and integrity and the way that they do business. There's a lot of good players that's in our team here. So,
that's been that's something unique that I've seen from Vertex versus some of the other private equity firms. They really have they're really looking for to build the dream team, it might sound like, right? They're trying to really build the all-star team. the not that other private equity groups are not buying good companies, but it seems like Vertex is buying the brands in the market, like looking for the best known, the real high quality operators and companies in each market.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I mean, and it is a mindset is a little different, right? So like the goal is to consolidate what you can consolidate, put everybody into the same thing. But when you sit down at some of the round tables, I sit down with Martin Pettigrew and Victor, and I sit down with Jeff Brett and Jason Reisman, and like when you sit at the table with some of these guys and you have some of the best brains in the industry, like we come up with some pretty awesome and crazy ideas that you just like, you're like, man, like why didn't we ever think of this? And then you take the best of the best, and then you put them into this category in it, and now it's like, John, now show them how to operate with it, right? So so it becomes a fun challenge of like, how do you take the best of the best along these brands that you have and you manage, and take these best practices to each spot and figure out like, what does this change management look like? What does this transition look like? Because it's all good change, but it's still, it's still got to go in with the right servant attitude, and and just make sure that you're helping them get to the right spot.
And I could see that like the melding of minds is awesome, but there's also probably a balancing of I mean, those are very successful people all in one room.
Yeah.
Sometimes maybe having conflicting ideas.
Yeah.
I don't know how, but I guess a shared mission is probably what brings people together, right? Like I would assume that's the case. What are some of you'd mentioned that, a lot of the stuff that you've been doing is working on, digging into operations, inefficiencies and things like that. What have you learned from looking at it at this level now? What are some of the things that someone going from 2 to 5 or 5 to 10 or even 10 to 15 or something like that? What are some of the things that they can look at, that they're not seeing?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's one of those things that you don't know what you don't know until you don't know that you don't know it, right? So, I mean, it's you feel really good when you're building a business and you feel like that you've got a lot of it figured out. And I know that sounds like egotistical, but like you know what's working and what's going, and but those same things don't work in everybody's business, and so learning how to adjust and adapt and overcome, right? And make sure that the same theology, the same mentality, the same mission gets imprinted into this other brand is like that's the art, right? So that's the art of it. So it makes it fun too. It's kind of like what you said. It's kind of like back in my coaching days. When you have an all-star basketball team, it's like like you go through the little bit of a draft, and you're like, okay, I want these 3 kids, and you wind up with a 12 to 15 man team, and you're like, I got to start everybody. It's like, how do you not start everybody, right? And so everybody has so many strengths, and then you got to learn the playbook of like, where's everybody's strengths at, and to make sure that you're covering blind spots. So it's real difficult to kind of manage an all-star team. I mean, I know it sounds like it'd be easy, but it's actually it's more challenging because you got new personalities, you got new ways of doing things, you got guys that have done things for 35 years a certain way, and you're like, hey, have you ever thought about it this way? So it's more challenging in a good way to like to see how that you can make light bulbs go off. Like it's always been fun, but it used to be like, hey, when I was owner operator, you would still have this influence, but a lot of times you have the influence because you got to write the paycheck. And I know it sounds, not great, but it is great. But now you're talking to guys that are on your level, and you're trying to help have that influence as well. So it's a new way to operate, and it's fun. Actually, it's really fun because you get there and you get to know them and how they do things, and and
you mentioned that some things, and I think everyone thinks that maybe there's one way, right? Like and a lot of times, maybe in the guru space, right? It's like, this is the way, right? This is the only way. So it gets sold that there's one way to do it. But in my experience, man, there's a lot of successful people doing a lot of different things in their businesses, right? And what are some of the reasons now that you're getting to see this? Like, man, this is working over at this in this company, but it didn't work here. Or why do you think it is? Like, why do you think that one company crushes it doing some strategy or tactic, and then another company tries it and it just falls flat? Why do you think that happens?
Yeah. So I'll preface it with this, right? So if we're running a play and we want to get to the number 10, right? 5 plus 5 is 10. 5 times 2 is 10. 20 minus 10 is 10, right? So like there's multiple ways to get to the same spot. And so being able to have the position to where that you can see all people around the table, even though that we're trying to get to the same spot, sometimes it has to be a different path. And those paths are usually because of culture. Not that it's a bad culture. It's never a bad culture issue. It's just the way that you bring it to your people, right? It could also be a strength issue, like they're really strong in marketing, but not that strong in production, or vice versa. So it's like things that we think are simple of like, hey, you just turn up your LSA and now you have these hundreds of thousands of leads, right? But for some people, it's more of a challenge because they don't have the speed to lead programs to go with things. So it's a cultural mindset, right? So like now that you have these brands that you bring in, you have guardrails that you got to put into place, and you can make them a little bit narrow as you go, but you got to have guardrails. Okay, so here's the new guardrails.
We're not subtracting, we're only adding, right? We're only going to do,
exactly.
We're only adding. It's either 1 plus 9 or 2, 2 plus 7.
We're still going in the same direction. It's still a one-way street, right? I'm still on this side of the highway, but I now put up different guardrails to kind of keep them, or we try to do that to try to just keep everybody focused on the same thing, right? So if we're trying to get to the number 10 and you're really good at 2 and 8, let's do 2 with 2 plus 8. But the company might be good at 3 plus 7. So it's okay to get there as long as we're getting there, because it's just based on different strengths and weaknesses. And as long as we understand that weaknesses are not a bad thing, it's just how do you navigate around them? So I think that's the main thing.
I love that analogy because, and then I think of that from an ownership or leadership level in a company, is that your team may have a different way to get there than you have to get there. From a managerial standpoint, how would you, like, we're talking about kind of more of a, on a very high leadership level, what you're dealing with, but how do you deal with, what would be a way to kind of do that for your team also? Because I think this same analogy can go all the way down, like to the job site supervisors, all the way out to the canvasser. Like any way you go, I think that this can that this same analogy applies.
Yeah. So it really gets into leadership training, right? So learning that I lead up and down and sideways, right? So you lead you have to be centric, like everybody around you lead to, whether it's a leader leads, right? Whether you're leading the person that's the same rank as you or higher or lower, like, so to do that, like it's actually, man, I have a good coach that's got me here over the last 3 years. It's Jeff Volder. I don't know if you guys know him, but good dude. So he's been a great coach. But one of the things that he taught me was I can't do it for you, right? I have to lead you to there by asking the right questions. Even though I have my own idea of what I want you to do and I have my own mission of where I need you to go, sometimes I have to figure out what is the equation. And sometimes the equation to get there is just by asking a couple of things. One is always like, one is I don't think that there's anything such as a problem. Like there are no problems. There's only unsolved opportunities. And so when somebody comes to you with these unsolved opportunities, it's like, well, what have you tried? Right. And then the next question I'm going to ask is, what do you think that we should do? right? And then you empower them and in their leadership role to make a decision, say, well, I think that we should do X, X, and X. Well, let's say that it's not a great idea, right? I mean, it happens, right? Like I've been down this path. I don't want to go, well, no, you got to do it this way, because a lot of times they wind up leaning on you to make all decisions. So now it's more like, okay, well, listen, so if we do that, have you thought about this? So if we go down this path, so here's some things that we might see. What's your idea on how to overcome those? It's question based. You just go through this whole question thing. And in any time that you speak as a leader, like this is really, it's close to my heart. Is it true? Is it kind? And is it helpful? If it's not all three, don't say a word, right? Listen more until you can come up with something that's true, kind, and helpful. So even whenever I'm mad or something crazy just happens, something hits you, like, I've told this guy 30 times, like, how to do this, right? I had to look at myself and say, well, I should have only had to tell him once. What did I do that I'm not conveying this message the right way? So when you get to that extreme ownership part of like, how do I respond in a true, kind, helpful way? It kind of slows you down to where that you help your team make really good decisions, because you want to know their opinion, because they're in the middle of the fight. Like they're in the trenches, in the battle, and you're sitting in a spot, hopefully, that you can see it from a new perspective. So
that's the thing. And that leadership aspect is how to get to the next levels, right? Yeah. Like that's what unlocks the next levels in your business, in my opinion, right? It's the people that unlock the next levels. So your ability to lead those people is really what unlocks that next level. I love that. True, kind, and helpful. That's awesome. Coaching the team, how does a person know where their gaps are from a leadership perspective? Like, I think that's something that happens often is people feel like that they are leading in a good way, or that, like, this is the way I manage, so this is what it is, but I think that, man, there's completely other levels to this, right? Yeah. And I remember reading in a book one time, it was about CEOs, and it's like the best CEOs ask the best questions.
Yep.
Like they just ask questions. They very rarely say a statement even, right? How do you get to that level? What's that path look like?
Yeah. So it's a good question. So from a leadership standpoint, the number one thing is if the only value that I bring to you is your paycheck, then I'm failing 100%. So that's the first way that you got to examine yourself, right? So, and this came from another guy that I learned a lot from too. But like, money will never be a problem for an employee, right? It should never be a problem, right? Because if you place yourself under a good leader that you want to emulate, that's the first step to everything. So like me personally, like I want to make sure that like when I'm selling my company, that I want my team to be up under the same leadership structure that I would approve of. So like that was for us, like really diving in deep to making sure that we really were involved with a servant leadership mentality, right? So if you think of it being a contractor of choice, you got to be the employer of choice, and you got to have that servant leadership, which is a true statement. The next thing is you got to be proud of the great name you work for. I'll throw some biblical stuff out there. It's Proverbs 22:1. Like, you have to be proud of the name you work under, right? Because if not, like, then you're not getting value to your people. You got to find the nature of work to leverage your unique gifts. So that goes back to the 1 + 9 = 10, right? So your gifts might be number 3 and his gifts are 7. You put them together and you get to 10. So you got to make sure that you will leverage that. And then, are you passionate about what you're doing, right? So is your battery charged at work to be a better husband, a better father, a better, everything in life? So do you go home energized, or do your people go home, they're defeated. And so those are the things that I focus on from my leadership stance. How do I get to those points to where that's the value that I can put into people, is that they want to be within the fold of our leadership. So as I looked up into, listen, we're going to go through an acquisition. Is this a team that I wanted to align with that's going to keep those values down? And that's it, man. Like those. I mean, I don't know where to go from there with it, but what are the things that we're happy to sacrifice to be there, right? So like, it sounds crazy, but like, it's like you have to be passionate about what it is you're doing and who you work for, or it just doesn't matter the money. So I want to bring different type of value, enrich people's lives, and I believe that we've aligned with the right PE firm, and that's usually not the terminology that people get is PE firms and passionate about people, right? So
that doesn't sound right in the universe when you put that out there, but it is true. Like if you find the right, if there is the right intention and everything, and I think that maybe that's it. Maybe it's you have to find your intention, right? And if your intention is money, you're probably going to have a challenge becoming a good leader.
Yep.
If your intention is the money in your bank account.
Yep.
Right? Like if your intention is the money in others' bank accounts, that's that leadership, right? And so I think something that for people to think about now too is, going at scale, like into a very large corporation now, what you guys have. I heard a quote or a statement here is, do you really want to be a CEO? Right? Like, do you really want to be a COO? Do you really want to be a CMO? Do you want to like understand the duties of before you put that title next to your name, right? And make sure that you are that now if you are the CEO of your roofing company or the COO of your roofing company or the president of your roofing company, know what that entails and what that really is. Or are you better off in another seat? As these companies have transitioned together, have some people gone to different seats that were more appropriate for their skill set?
Yeah, it's a great question. So keep in mind, you're building the bus and driving it at the same time, right? So,
that's right.
So there's going to be injuries. And sometimes there's better people at the bus stop to put people on the bus than what there are the people actually driving the bus, right? So like, you got to keep that in mind. It's like when you're the owner operator and you got to do it all, you feel like that you're the best at everything because you have to be the best at everything. But when you get into a group of all-stars, it's refreshing to be able to focus on the things that, one, that you're passionate about, and two, that you can really like make a difference in, right? So like you can almost be not one dimensional, but you can almost focus on one aspect and do it really, 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 really good, like superior good, compared to focusing on 30 tasks and just be okay at all of them. Right. So like, that's the beauty of it. So I don't think there's really a whole lot. It's a challenge sometimes for people to see that that's their best attribute. So that's the real challenge, I would say, in all that is like, like if I'm coming to Jim and be like, hey, listen, Jim, like your best attribute is doing podcasts. It's not really being a marketer, right? Like sometimes people don't see that that's their best aspect. But at the end of the day, it's like you got to help them see that through the right lines of questioning, right? And like help them understand that you're really good at this. And if, I would love if you were passionate about it as well. Because if you're passionate and really good, now it's to the moon. I mean, you can't stop that person.
Yeah. I think that's an understanding of self, right? Especially when you're the owner. Because there's really no one to tell you, right? And I think that's a challenge a lot of times. Sometimes it's like, man, just, get out of your own way in some cases, right? Are you an operator? Are you a salesperson? Are you a sales manager? Are you, find your strengths.
Yep.
I think that also, I want to go down this road too, because now you guys have, you have people to answer to.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different thing in entrepreneurship.
It's different.
When you get when you have to actually answer to someone, right? Like that's a whole different. I've come up with a little theory, Jon, over the last year or so, that as business owners, we don't really have that. We say that we have the ownership and that we have the that we're gonna run this marathon and we're all in. But we all have our days. You know what I mean?
I got you. Yeah.
We all have our days. We all have our years sometimes. I've talked to, a lot of contractors, man, they had a flat year. They had a down year. But they don't have that. They didn't have the same level of they're not going to get fired.
Right.
Right? Like a CEO of a large corporation has a board of directors that, hey, if they don't hit their mark, if they're not executing on what they're supposed to be doing, they could get fired.
Yeah.
How is it? Now that you guys have that, right? There's a different level of pressure. Maybe I don't want to call it pressure, but there's a different level of you have to answer to someone. How can that be replicated in some way for a smaller business?
So I would say this is the number one thing that I've learned, right? That we always tried to do, but you always wound up kind of not doing it, right? Because you would, as an owner operator, it's like you would play in the gray, some because you had to, right? Like you'd put a guy in a truck that may or may not have had a good driver's license, but you had to get the job done to make payroll to pay the other 30 families. So you operated in the gray a lot more, but it was your money to risk. So, and it was worth the gamble because you had a lot of people that depended on you. So I would say the main thing is objective versus subjective, right? So gray versus black and white. So now it's actually a little easier to operate because I can operate in black and white. I operate on an objective standard with everything. And the subjective standard, like the cool part about the way that we look at things at Vertex is there is a little bit of subjectivity left, right? Compared to where a lot of PE firms don't allow some room for personal growth. But there is still some things there that you can measure subjectively. Like, are they making an impact? Like, is there a servant leadership mentality? Sure, we're trying to figure out the right role because they're learning something new. But like, is their attitude staying good? Are they putting in the effort? Well, the performance is going to come, right? So it's still what I've always done is attitude, effort, and performance. And then it's the right person, wrong role. So like, just make sure that you got the right persons on the bus. But I think the thing that has helped me do is learn that I can live under an objective standard and it's okay to look at numbers, because people lie, numbers suck. People lie, opinions suck, but numbers never do, right? So like that's the way you got to look at some things. So you got to look at it objectively and then say, okay, all right. So objectively, like I'll say this: we had a sales rep that his father actually passed away as well, so his numbers crashed, right? But they both worked in the company, so it was very objectively. If I only look at it under an objective microscope, it's like cut the guy, he's not hitting it. But subjectively, you could still allow some grace in there. And that's really what servant leadership is all about. Yes, objectively, I have a measure, but is the subjective measure really something that you can measure? That makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And how do we do that for ourselves, though? Also, right? Like, I guess we can give ourselves some grace at times. I like to say that with, in business ownership, a lot of times we don't give ourselves grace. We're, man, it may take longer to build this than it should.
Yeah.
But then there's other times where, hey, we were gonna do this quarter, and it's not done.
Yeah.
And it's my fault that it's not done. That's a whole nother aspect of it, I think.
So it's the same thing there, right? Is if you have an objective standard. So like me as an owner operator, right? Because we still own Ugly Roof. Like if we're not hitting our objective, I'm going to fire myself from that role and put somebody else there. It's the same thing. You still have to keep that objective standard. If I'm in the way, then I have to remove myself. I have to be smart enough to remove myself, right? Because if I stay in the way, then it's going to tank. So you still have to have an objective standard. And if you're the person that's in the way, it sucks to have to admit that. But like, there's been times I'm like, you know what? I'm in the way. And so I had a really good business partner, and I still do. But like, we were able to look at each other and be like, hey, like, I'm in the way or you're in the way. Let me run this play and you run this play. And it worked out great, right? But if you don't have that person that you can bounce that off of, I would recommend getting a mentor, getting a coach that you can be open and honest with, and they can tell you, hey, you're in your way. Like, you're thinking about this the wrong way because you're thinking about it in a prideful way or a monetary way instead of like, how do I actually, overcome this opportunity, right? Instead of, just having the vantage point of it's a problem. So a lot of times we get in our own way, and then our pride and our ego is in the way on top of being in the way, right? So it's okay to say, I suck at accounting. I know enough about accounting that I can hire somebody. I know how to operate QuickBooks, but I know how to audit the controller. I went out and I mastered it, even though I hated it, because I wanted to be able to hire somebody that I knew how to audit, right? So it's okay to say, I'm not good at this. I'm not good at like entering receipts in all day and doing the journal entries, but I need to know how to do it too at the same time.
So along the way, we do learn a lot of things. When is it time to, because sometimes you just can't give it up because you're not at a place where you can afford a good team member and things like that. How does one make that decision of who the next person is in their business to take away those things that are not their best strengths?
Well, that's that grind to growth mentality, right? So we get stuck in the grind a lot of times and we don't delegate because one, it's like, well, I got to make money and I got to get there faster and I can do it myself. I can do it myself. So you hire all these people who are just running tasks, right? Who aren't really in independent leadership. So it has to almost be a full reset, or it has to be from the very start as far as a mindset and a mentality. Because a lot of times you get stuck as you're the leader, but you're really the boss and you're just telling everybody what to do instead of leading them on how to do it. So you have to grow in a strategic way that, like no limitations as you're growing, right? So if you know that you can't cover the spread on this, then don't bet on it, right? So like, like that's the best way you do it. Run the play, but if you can't cover it, then don't hire that person until you have the time to actually train them. Like, don't hire. I mean, it sounds crazy. Stay small until you can. Right. Until you got something else that's automated, something else there. But you have to start with that mentality of like, who's going to be my first hire? Right. So I need to go ahead and get that department ironed out to where I can have all the SOPs written and I can lift it and shift it to somebody else. And then I can train it. And then I go to the next thing. How do I lift and shift? So if you can't lift and shift, like you're going to be in the doom spiral for the rest of your life. And you'll never be able to do that. And what I say by SOP and lift and shift, like a lot of the issues is we don't trust people. Again, I don't trust a lot of people, but I trust process, right? If I build a process and I know how to audit that process, I can trust the process and put people into it. Then you learn to trust the person because they're sticking to the process.
I think about the metrics that get measured in the process too. And that's where I feel like the trust actually gets built, is when the person is hitting the metrics that go along with the process, right? You may have a great process, but if they're going outside of that process, if you don't see it, because if you're not involved in in that task on a day-to-day basis, but you might be able to see something that is related to that, right? Like the metric that's moving over here. And if they're not on, now you can see that someone is not following the process, because if they were, the metrics would be right. Or at least it gives you a clearer vision. I've seen a lot of people hire salespeople and just be like, now this person didn't work out. And I'm like, well, what activities were you measuring? Well, sales. They didn't make a sale. And I'm like, well, but were you measuring the activity that leads to a sale?
Right.
Like, were you like, where did it fall off? Right. Like what, like I think that's a skill in itself, is knowing what to measure.
Yeah.
To know what the leading indicators are of the success or failure of that position. And I know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's micro and macro, right? So you got to know like the process of what's going on in the micro, and that's going to get you to your macro. So leadership versus employee, like, you have to be able to coach and help them understand why the micro is important, right? Because the macro is the outcome. So the macro is like you're talking about now, is I need you to sell $100,000 a month or whatever the KPI is. But the other KPIs are, well, how many doors did you knock? If you're in a door knocking thing, what is your issue to close, right? So like if I give you 10 leads, how many are you actually closing, right? How often is role play? Are you actually role playing with them? Like the worst person to allow to role play with your rep is the customer, because just because what you said with one, it's not going to work with everybody else, right? But it's also on leadership side. So the one thing that I've learned is that, sure, we have a really rigid process, and it's really good for new people coming in, and like you can train things. But that's why it's also like when my leadership is coming and they're saying, hey, like I'm dealing with this issue, that's why it goes back to the two questions. Well, what have you tried? Right. And so I'm asking, what have you done within the process? Have you actually followed the process? What's going on here? And what do you think that we should do? Because a lot of times I don't want to be egotistical and arrogant too and say that you have to stick to only this process if it's not actually working anymore, right? Because there's things that happen. Market shift, right? So like, I was saying, I don't know what I don't know. So like we talked about strengths and weaknesses earlier. I thought I was really strong in marketing until I get to this level. And now it's like, I know enough to be dangerous, right? Like, I still know quite a bit compared to some of the other peers, but like, and that wasn't meant to be egotistical, but like I still lack like 80% knowledge to be at a different level. So it's one of those things like, so the process is working, but we have this anomaly. So it's one of these things like, if you got an SOP in a process, it should always be willing to change it if it becomes a majority issue. So you got to be able to identify it. Is this an anomaly? Like, is this a one-off? Right. So you got a black swan, as Chris Voss calls it. Like if I got a black swan, then I'm not changing my process because it works 95% of the time. And I got this one person that doesn't like it. The process doesn't change because of that. Right. But if you get to the point to where you have, 50% of your customers are not happy because you're doing this one thing, then absolutely sit down and talk about it and listen to your leadership that's out there in the field, because like they know what's going on. And if they follow the process and they follow your leadership and you've been, true, kind, and helpful the whole time, like they're going to give you honest feedback as long as they feel like they can. And sometimes you have to change a part of the process. And I hate to say that because I'm such a process driven guy, but there's, I've learned a lot the last 2 years on that. It's like, hey, like what I was doing a year ago is not working this year. Like we just went through some of the toughest marketing I've ever seen in an election year. It was crazy. Crazy. And what I'll say is most operators I know are probably down 20, 30%. everybody that I know within our family is up 5 to 40%. Like nobody went backwards, which was amazing, right? So, because you don't know what you don't know. So, like, that's what I would say is like, the process might change some, but know when to switch and why to switch and make sure that you're asking the right questions. Don't just be willy nilly changing it all the time.
Yeah.
Right. So,
you framed it as building the bus as you're driving it. I like, I always say building the plane as you're flying it, like same thing, right?
like,
I see two things happen. A lot of times I'll see people or company owners that go too hard on the gas pedal as they're building the bus, right? And they don't have enough of the pieces in place to get this thing going, and that falls apart. But then I'll also see people that'll park the bus in the garage and work on it forever and not get it out on the road and try to run in it, right? Like, and how do you balance that on an ongoing basis? Because I think everything is an iteration. There's nothing that is set in stone. It's always iterating, constant iterating. You'd mentioned like unsolved opportunities. That's all it is, man. There's always another unsolved opportunity, right? There is never going to not be an unsolved opportunity. And so what's the balance between get the feet on the street and start selling this thing?
Yeah.
Versus we got to get this process right.
Yeah. So I'm a gearhead. So I've built and drove race cars most of my life, except for the last 10 years I've stayed out of them. And I love to go to the dirt track. So historical data and knowledge will tell me that when I pull into this track, it's going to be dry slick and I need to have this certain setup. Right. So I'm going to look at historical data and I'm going to say, okay, I'm setting the car up this way. I'm at the track. I'm not going to keep working on the car. I'm going to put it on the track and see what it does. Right. Like if I usually win with this setup, right. And then I get to the finish line and I run my heat race and I finish 10 out of 10. Well, I'm going to make some adjustments. Right. So I ran that heat race. Well, I'm going to go back out there in the B main, right? And I'm going to change the setup because the track changed or whatever it is. The track has changed some. Same track. I'm still in roofing, but the track changed. It's no longer dry slick. I now have a tacky track. And so I'm going to put a different set of tires on it. I'm going to put a different gear in it and I'm going to put a new setup in it. And now I'm going to run the B main from the 18th spot and I'm going to win it. But guess what? I'm going to the A main. I'm still starting at the tail as the number 24 car. So you have to. The only way to get to the front of the pack is you got to put the car on the track, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's just like you said. You can't park it in the garage. Like you can't win a championship if you're on the bench. You can't win a championship if the car is in the garage. So you have to make changes as you go. But the fundamentals are still there. I still have a chassis. I still got a body. I still got brakes. I still got a motor. I still got a transmission. I still got a rear end. So I'm just making these minor tweaks, right? Next season, I might scrap the whole car and put in a whole new chassis, a whole new motor, a whole new transmission. But in the middle of the season, like I can't do that. So I would think of it in dirt track terms. I know it's crazy, but like you got to get out there and you got to run it. And I might go all the way to the back of the pack, but because I made a bad decision and put the wrong tires on, or I put the wrong gear in it, or whatever it is. But that happens. But guess what? I'm on the track. I'm running the race, right? I'm still gonna hopefully finish the race. So that's the way I would, in those terms, you have to put the car on the track and go.
You have to. And that's what it is. But you're putting the car on the track with the intention of getting the data.
Yeah. Yeah. But
to get the feedback, right? Like if you have that intention, hey, we're going to get the car on the track. We did 10 laps and now we know, okay, let's try this. Let's try that.
Exactly. Well, you rely on historical data or past marketing data, right? The market says that this type of person should buy this type of roof, right? You rely on historical and marketing data, but when you get out there and you go to the back of the pack, it's like, well, wait a minute, this obviously is not the best setup. So I'm not scrapping the car. I'm not scrapping the motor. I'm not scrapping the transmission. I just got to make a gear change and a bar change, right? And put on a new set of tires, and I go to the front. So you just got to understand, like, the historicals are going to give you enough to get started, right? The market is going to give you enough to get started, but you got to know that, hey, like, I might have to tweak because my customer in this region is actually in this zip code is who I want it to actually be, and I'm attracting the wrong customer because of the.
What are some of your favorite tweaks over the last couple of years?
Some of the favorite tweaks, one is finding the right KPI. So and because you got to compensate the behavior that you want, right? So like it's a lot on production too, because a lot of people think about, the sales KPI, but when you think about producing the product, like it's different, right? So if I want my production manager to get him as much stuff installed as what he can, but I want to have fewer punch list items, well, I'm going to base his KPIs based off of collections. Now, the team that works for him, though, they're not based on collections. They're based on earned revenue and installed revenue. So I want them to be able to install it as fast and as hard as they can, but he has to be able to oversee the quality control and force them to do quality control as well, because if he's not collecting it, then he's not getting paid his KPIs. If they're not installing it, they're not getting paid their KPIs. And then out there in the field, with your field rep, whatever you're going to call them, a project manager or runner or whatever, like, I pay them based on returns because they're managing the crew. And I want to make sure that we're not just blowing money away on material. So like, you can start to tweak in some of these KPIs, and now you see a well-oiled machine. Like, they're paying attention to the crew and the materials, which is what I need them to do, right? The one step up, the actual install managers are watching to make sure that they're getting as much stuff installed as possible, right? So they're getting paid on that KPI. And then the guy at the top, it's based on collection. So you can't collect it unless it's completed and no punch list. So it's like you have this quality control all the way down. So like, it's those little tweaks that always keep my mind going. Is like, how do you incentivize that thing that you need, right? So
yeah, and what metric do you measure at that specific role?
Yeah,
I think it gets hard for people. It's easier on sales, right? It's easy on the sales side is easy.
Yep.
How do you do that with your office team? How do you do it with your,
how do you measure
right? Yeah. How do you measure the accountant that the taxes got filed on time? Like, what are the,
So I mean, there are things that you can do as far as your bookkeeper or whatever, but I mean, it's little things of like, hey, I need to have, July closed out by the 10th of August. Right.
That's
so
right.
You do measure with that. It's like, well, what's the accuracies here? And so, and then you audit them. Like, you make sure that the books are clean. Like the best advice that I can give anybody is that, 1 or 2 times a year, I would hire an outside firm to come in and audit your bookkeeper and your CPA, an outside firm. I don't care if it costs you 30 to 50 grand a year. It's worth every penny, because you're paying somebody else that's not in the books every day, that's not looking at the categories and the journal entries. And they're like, oh, well, you did this. Like, they'll help you find stuff that you never thought, even though your CPA is great, but they're in the middle of the grind, right? So that's how you grow your books, is you have an outside guy come in and look at it.
Yeah, it's business is fun, John.
It's crazy, man.
When you love it, right?
Fun stuff, dude. It's crazy.
It's so much fun. Like, we have, people don't know that, but like, we'll get on the phone every now and then and talk for like 2-3 hours sometimes, just talking about this stuff. And so you could be my co-host one day or something. We'll just sit here and chat for hours.
I love asking questions. I love it. It's good.
It is. It's good, man. And so now that, I want to kind of close this out with, a lot of people are looking at all the changes in the industry. Now you're down in Florida now. So you're it's right in your face, right? Like, I think that, would you say that Florida is probably where the most pressure is from the insurance side of things? I don't know what other states are really, I mean, to me, it seems like that's where the big pressure is coming.
Yeah, it's flipping from the roofing industry. It's flipping to retail very, very, very quickly because of new laws and regulations. But yeah, I mean, like I think it's 12 or 14% of all roofing is done in Florida, right? And like I think 30% of the claims nationwide are in Florida. Like it's insane. So like yes, there are a lot of insurance claims, but I do think that.
I want to think about two things, right? There's two kind of things going on, I think, that are out there, right? You have the changes in the insurance claims process and storm restoration work. I think that's a big challenge that people are facing. There's another thing that I think people are talking about that they're facing, and that is private equity coming in and doing, coming in and merging together all of these great companies and making something that is hard to compete with.
Yeah.
Where do you see the path for the owner operator going into the next 5-10 years?
This is a great question. So I think private equity is going to soak up about 20% of the industry. I think there's a sleeping giant that nobody's looking at. It's Home Depot. I'm going to call it. Home Depot will overnight take 20% market share. They have all the data on all of our homeowners, including me as a homeowner. I think Lowe's enters in right behind them, and combined, I think they're 25 to 30% of the market. So I think 50% of the market is gone in 7 years. So what I would say is this, get really, really good at what you do. I would find as much niche work as what you can. If you're good at tile, do tile. If you're good at slate, do slate. I would get into, I don't want to say this in a negative way. Shingles are going to be a commodity that the giants are going to rule because you can scale that. Stuff you can't scale is copper work. Stuff you can't scale is slate work. Stuff you can't scale is synthetics, right? It's really hard to scale that. So I'd get really, really, really good at that and make sure that you can diversify the business to switch away from shingles. I hate to say it, but like that's what's coming. Whatever's the easiest thing to grab is going to be part of a commodity. So I don't know if I was doom and gloom there, but like if I'm an owner operator in roofing still, I would definitely focus on the harder things and get back to what craftsmanship was instead of just trying to sling the shingles, because I think that's going to be very difficult entry in 5 to 7 years.
The gold rush might be over.
I think the gold rush is over as far as it goes. Yeah, because you got to think, right? So like partnering up with somebody like a Home Depot, like that's going to happen. They've tried it 2 or 3 times, So now that there's consolidation in the roofing industry, and they might partner with a private equity firm. They might build their own. I mean, it's very difficult. Everybody thinks it's so unique to their market, but 80% of what you can do can be done in any market. So, I see them being the first e-com. Like it'll be an online checkout, and it'll be hard to compete with that. No sales, very low marketing budget because they've already got all of the information and the data, and it's going to be hard to compete with. That's my thing. So PE will be able to compete because they have the money to back it, but they don't have the Home Depot money, right? So I think that's going to be the thing to look at. So learn to specialize again, become a craftsman again, be okay, and learn to maximize as much profit at a $10 million level. So the guys that I'm worried about are the ones that are between that 7 to 18 that have high overheads and stuff like that. So if you don't have plans to get into 30 to 40, then, in 5 years, you're going to be under 10. So just be prepared for that.
All right, man. This has been another episode of the Roofing Success Podcast. Thank you for tuning into the Roofing Success Podcast. For more valuable content, visit roofingsuccesspodcast.com. While there, check out our sponsors for exclusive offers, shop for merchandise, and sign up for our newsletter for industry updates and tips. Also, join the Roofing Success Facebook group to connect with other professionals and stay updated on the latest trends. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment. Your support helps us continue to bring you top industry insights. The website link is in the description. Thanks for listening.